Okay, we all good, guys?
Sure. So good afternoon, folks. While we're waiting for everybody else to join our session, we're just asking you to take a few moments and write in the chat 1, 2, or 3 to indicate the number that reflects your comfort level with subitizing. We hope by the end of this session that you'll feel more comfortable, more knowledgeable on this subject.
I see lots of 2s there starting, Denise.
That's great, Bruce.
Don't forget, I don't know, Denise, if you mentioned it already, but there's a little blue kind of toggle that you can change to all panelists and attendees so that we can all see your responses. You just change it to all panelists and attendees, then we can all see it. Kim, I like it. Kim says 3, or at least I like to think so. I agree.
Positive thinking, that's always great. Looking forward to this session. Got a feeling Heather's going to open our eyes and our minds to subitizing today.
She has definitely opened my eyes over the last week or so of conversation. I've had lots of kind of aha moments, and so, yeah, looking forward to sharing that.
I'm not sure, it's approaching that time. Did you want to get started, maybe, you think, Alicia?
Sure, yeah, I think so. We'll kind of get started if you want to go ahead, Denise. That's awesome.
Okay. So again, we'd love to just welcome everyone taking time out of your day to join us here today. This is our first of 4 sessions for subitizing. So if we could go to the next slide, I think we're ready to start. So we'll start with our traditional territorial acknowledgement. I love this one. This is one that Gretchen Sands-Gamble has created and shared with us. And in the Lambton, Kent, we are very lucky to be surrounded by many rivers, lakes, and streams. We use these bodies of water for recreation, industry, sustenance, and they're also homes to many plants and animals that keep our environment clean. We must acknowledge that this area looked quite a bit differently not too long ago. The area that we farm, shop, and live in is the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. We must acknowledge that through treaties, the mutual sharing of this land was agreed upon, and within those treaties, there is an obligation and responsibility to care for this land, and it extends to all peoples. Please just take a moment and maybe make a reflection or to a commitment to the land and the people who have lived here for thousands of years. It's very nice, Gretchen. Thanks for that. So again, we would like to thank you for coming. Truly appreciate taking the time from your very busy schedule this week. We'd like to just refresh your memory of the 3 sessions that were done last year. You'll find those archives on the LK Elementary blog. That's to the left there, the white ones. To the right is just a little promo for the other 3 remaining sessions that are coming up in the next 3 weeks. You'll also notice that Heather Wark is here again with us. We're very pleased to have her. So about today's session and communicating with today's session, if you would like to use the chat, please type it in there, and we will be monitoring that. If you have a question that you'd like to ask specifically, you can type it in the Q&A. Unfortunately, with the Q&A, only the panelists can see it, but that's okay. We will address any questions that you have for Heather or just for any clarification as they come up. There is also the raise your hand option, and if you'd like to speak, Rod can unmute your mic, and then you can have the floor, and you can ask Heather any specific questions that you might have. So today is session number 1, and it is about Subitizing. There is a focus with the early math continuum, and we have some FDK teachers and some ECE educators in here today. And we'd like to thank them for taking time to join us today. So I am Denise Ladd, and I am an elementary instructional coach, and I am joined today by Alicia. Alicia, you'd like to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So we are so lucky today that we have our dear, dear friend Heather Wark joining us. And today during the session, she's going to go over a few kind of key ideas. So we'll start there, and then we'll introduce kind of the rest of the panel. So today we're going to just quickly go back and talk about what is number and the difference in subitizing, there being 2 different types of subitizing, which for me, speaking from my own experience, was a little bit of new learning and kind of thinking about that in a different mindset. So we're going to talk about those 2 kinds. We're also going to talk about some different subitizing exercises that are going to help our students as educators. And then we are also going to talk about some activities to generate subitizing for our students as well. Okay, so a packed kind of 45-hour, however long, today. So again, Denise joining us today. I'm Alicia Schenk, one of the instructional coaches. And of course, we have our friend Heather Wark here, who is I like to refer to her as our math guru, our go-to when we have questions and aren't really sure what to say. She's always great to reach out. So Heather, thank you so much for being here. And we also have our panel of FDK educators joining us today, and I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves. Diana, if you wanted to tell us, where you're at, what your role is.
Sure. I'm an early childhood educator at P. McGibbon School. I have worked there for 9 years, and my teaching partner right now is Allison Boz, and we've been together almost 2 years. So we're still working through a partnership and learning together, and this has been an excellent opportunity for just the 2 of us to have some really hard and open conversations about what math is and how we can teach our kindergarten students.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Blair?
Blair Warner. I'm at High Park in French Immersion Kindergarten with Andrea Hessel. We've been together, I think this is our 7th year. There's been a lot of different students at different degrees of learning that we've had. That's the most politically correct way I can think of putting it. And this year has been different. And I'm excited to be doing this session because I think we have a lot of students that can really excel with subitizing, and we can get them to where we haven't been able to get students before.
Awesome. Great. And is your partner in crime there?
She's hiding.
Here I am. I'm Andrea Hessel, and I've been teaching French Immersion Kindergarten at High Park for about 10 years now. And Blair Warner is my fearless partner. And I'm excited to be on this journey as well, to learn and to help fellow educators with their math journey. So thank you for having me, and thank you for coming.
Great, thank you. Without further ado, Heather, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Well, welcome everyone, especially our illustrious ECE teams, our kindergarten teams here with us who have bravely gone out and tested some stuff out in the classroom and been willing to share some of what they've been doing in the classroom so that we can take a look at what some activities might look like. And so I really, really want to shout out to those folks. Well, probably won't be the last time actually, but thank you for all that you've done to help bring this together so that we can look at what this Subitizing thing looks like in real classrooms with real kids. So I really appreciate that. I'm just going to stop sharing for one short second and just to make sure we have the most up-to-date slide deck here, and we'll get going again right away. Here we go. So for those of you who've been following us for a little while, this will be old information, but for those of you who are new to the board or who didn't, catch up with the sessions that we did last year, then this will catch you up really quick. This little segment we're going to start with is going to basically recap what we did last time, just very briefly. And if it piques your interest and you didn't happen to catch those sessions we did last January, then you can feel free to check those out after you finish here. We're not going to cover the exact same territory. There's just a little bit of crossover, overlap, I guess is actually a better word. For the most part, we're going to dig into some new territory, but you don't have to have watched the first session on Subitizing before this one. So if you're here and you didn't catch January, then you can go back and look later. I'm here because I have the wonderful opportunity to be able to work closely with Dr. Alex Lawson here at Lakehead University, who is a researcher here, and she published this book and developed this continuum of learning through her research, and this continuum of how students learn mathematics comes from her research. And I know that at Lambton Kent, you folks have been working with this continuum for a couple of years now. And so for many of you, this image or one very similar to it is quite familiar. And so after doing some work with your various teachers in the board, last year, I was asked to share some of the work that Alex is looking at that might happen before the continuum starts. So the continuum starts with where students can already add. And when we were sharing this with educators, we were asked a lot, well, what happens before they can add? What happens before they can add? And so Alex has added a piece to the continuum here that comes before the continuum that you're more familiar with, perhaps. And so this yellow portion she's put on in advance of where they learn to add. So she's put the word draft across here because this doesn't come from her own research. This comes from other research and from learning theory that you have probably read other researchers such as Doug Clements, who does a lot of work in this area. And so this drawing depicts their research and not her own, because her research started in grade 1. So a lot of the students have already moved through some of this territory, not all of them for sure, but a large portion of the students who were in her research project were already past this territory. So today's session is going to target this particular strategy, and we call it Subitizing. And we call it a strategy because it fits into how we do things or how we might know something. And in this case, it's how we know how many. But it's challenging for me to think about it as a strategy because it's something that we kind of do a bit automatically as adults. And so it doesn't feel as much like a strategy as maybe some of these other ones. As you go further along the continuum, it becomes quite automatic. But it is nonetheless categorized here as a strategy. And it's to help we use it to determine how many. So what is subitizing? Some of you might be wondering. This is the ability to know the number of objects without counting. So how do you know the number of objects without counting? So there would be examples of that you are probably aware of, that where you can just look at a set of objects and know how many are there without actually counting. And also in Dr. Lawson's book, she says that she calls subitizing an essential strategy, one that is foundational to the development of a strong sense of number. So I don't know about you, but when I became an educator, this wasn't a word that I know. It depends how long you've been an educator, I suppose. Hopefully some of you who are new to the profession, this is something perhaps that you learned coming through school. But if you didn't, then this is a great spot to be. But it is an essential strategy. That is a very strong word coming from Dr. Lawson, coming from Alex, meaning that she feels that students, we need to do these types of activities. It's not really just a nice to do, it's a must do in order for us to provide our students with the best opportunity to understand mathematics, which is for her and for myself a matter of equity across all of our students. So some students will just develop subitizing kind of on their own, but some will not. And so those students are the ones that we're really serving by our intentional choice to include it in our education programming. So I'm going to get into a little bit more about what subitizing is in just a moment, but the last time we did a session, we looked at the 5 things that help with subitizing activities. There was some things about questioning, using their fingers when you're subitizing. We have the choice of the numbers that you might use, and some organization of those objects, how that might support them. And we also have some subitizing routines in terms of how you draw their attention to the subitizing, how they're going to know exactly how it's going to play out. And so last time we dug into those 5 areas, and we also mentioned 5 different activities that you could do to for subitizing activities. So we had some dot plates, we had games, we had 5-frame activities. Oh, sorry. Looking at the wrong screen. We had 5-frame activities, and we had using a book, or we had exit cards. So here's all the things that we looked at in our January session. And if you want to see those in detail, then you know where to find it. Today, we are going to take a bit of a different tack. We're going to look at some of these activities, and we're going to probably talk a little bit about these 5 things as we look a little deeper into specific activities that teachers have tried and have done. And so that's how today is going to work. So it's a little bit of a deep dive into some of the areas of using subitizing. We're going to frame today on 5 common questions that educators have about subitizing based on our experience of maybe misconceptions or what people are wondering about subitizing. And if you want to add to our questions list, just a little reminder about where that Q&A is at the bottom of your screen. You can add, and we can take your questions to add to our list as well. Are there any questions so far in that question area?
Not at this time, Heather. I think they're all just sitting there anxiously waiting to hear your words of wisdom coming on the concept of subitizing.
Well, they won't be all my words of wisdom, but here we go. Here we go. So question number one that we get is, what size should the collection of objects be? And I think this is a really fair question. I've certainly seen some things out there available on YouTube and whatnot that maybe the person who's making them doesn't really understand subitizing, and so maybe the collections are quite large. When I look at them, I think, oh gosh, I don't think students can subitize that much. So what size should the collection of objects be? Well, this question requires us to look at two different types of subitizing, because it really does depend on what we're looking for. So there are two different kinds of subitizing. There's what's called perceptual subitizing, which quite honestly is probably the type we think about. If you have done subitizing activities before, it's probably often in this realm. And then there's conceptual subitizing. And we're going to take a look at those two different ones and what they mean. So we're going to start with perceptual subitizing. So as the name suggests, perceptual subitizing is we're only basing our answer to the question of, how many, on what we just perceive. We just have to perceive it, and we just know how many are there. So I'm going to show you an image. It's going to appear somewhere around here. It's just going to flash up on the screen. And then you can put in the chat how many. It's going to be a die. So how many pips did you see on the die that you're looking at? So you can put in the chat how many pips did you see. Here we go. Lots of 4s. That's excellent. That means we're awake and we've learned how to subitize 4. We can see what that looks like. So that's wonderful. So most adults have enough exposure to this particular pattern to be able to just say, with looking at it, that it's 4. And so because you probably didn't have to do any kind of calculation to know that, then we would call that perceptual subitizing. A conceptual subitizing is occurs when you have to do just a little bit of math in order to know how many are there. So I'm going to show you again. This is going to be 2 dice together, and you can put in the chat how many pips there are, what numbers represented by the 2 dice faces. There we go. Lots of 6s. So absolutely. So most of us probably did a little bit of math because of how this picture is presented. Most people probably did 4 + 2 is 6, just so quickly in your brain you don't even really think about it as work. Sometimes conceptual subitizing images can be more challenging than this for us, and we can really feel our brains working and trying to do a little calculation. This one's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to show you one more image. This time it's going to be a dot plate. And you can let me know how many dots you see in the chat. Yeah, I see lots of, remember in the chat, if you want everyone to see it, you have to click on panelists and attendees because this is a webinar format. Okay, so a lot of 8s coming up in the chat. So here's this image again. So both this image and the previous one with the 2 dice, the way that they're structured helps you to subitize. the images to some degree. So this one probably you saw 4 and 4 and then did a quick calculation with 8. Maybe you saw it a different way, but because of the color and the spacing, that is the most likely pathway. And like I said, with the dice, it's most likely you did 4 plus 2 because of how they're set up. Either way, you've done a little bit of a calculation to help you know the total number of dots. So I'm just going to pause there and see if there are any questions. I see you've turned your mic off, Denise, so maybe you have a question or something.
Yeah, I just was wondering, so would you suggest that by doing it in the 2 different colors, you're more or less forcing folks to look at it as a 4 plus 4 scenario?
I think you want to be really flexible and have lots of different dot plates so that you can look at all the combinations. We're going to look a little bit later at how we can use subitizing to help our students learn to decompose numbers. And because that is one of the powerhouses of subitizing, is to help our students learn all of the combinations inside of a number. And so by using a variety of organizations of number, we want them to be able to see all of those things. That's such a great question, because sometimes, depending on what our goal is, we might choose not to use color to separate the set. So we're going to take a look at in just a little bit some different options there with dot plates. So another question that we get is, how do I do a dot plate number talk? Like, what is actually the process of doing that? And there's a lot that goes into it in terms of choosing the number that you're going to do. You're going to choose how you design the plate, like what you're trying to get out of it. And then there's also, the manner in which you will ask the questions inside of it. Because not only do we, of course, as educators have to plan and select all of the pieces, the number, and how we're going to do it. We have to create the plate, perhaps, if we don't have them already. And then we also have to think about, how am I going to question this student? And, maybe also importantly, what do I do if they don't get it correct? What if they don't know this one? How do we deal with that? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a little video that one of our educators made for us, Andrea, as she's doing a little dot plate with a student. And then we're going to ask her some questions about what she was thinking as she chose the plate and all of that kind of thing. So this is the plate up here in the corner that she's going to be showing her student. And I'm just going to make sure my volume is turned up. I hope it doesn't shock everybody all of a sudden when it comes on really loudly. So crossing my fingers there. So here we go.
Are you ready? There were how many dots? 4 dots? What color were they? Black. And how were they arranged?
They look like this.
1, 2, 3, 4. Good job.
Excellent. Okay. So we saw just a little interaction there, and I believe, oops.
Are you ready?
There we go. Now we have some questions for Andrea that I wanted to get some insight on based on this little piece of an interview. Why did you choose, Andrea, why did you choose this dot plate for this child?
I just wanted to see what she knew. I knew that she would know for sure 1, 2, and 3. So I pushed it a bit with 4 just to check in and see if we could push her a little bit further before I continued on with something different.
So you knew already she could do 1, 2, and 3. So this was actually a bit of an exploration choice for you with her.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. And she didn't disappoint. She knew it.
She didn't. She never does.
So maybe you were surprised, maybe you weren't, but sometimes they surprise us on both sides of what they know or what they don't know when we check. So she knew this one was 4. And so that's a great reason to pick, like 4 can be challenging. Is she a JK student or an SK student, Andrea?
She's JK, year 1.
Year 1, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, okay. We call them JK too. It's okay.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah.
Up here we call them JK. So she's in year 1, and so 4 is a tricky set actually at that age. So she's definitely doing well in terms of her number sense to be able to say 4 when she looks at that plate. And she was also able to remember, the orientation there when you asked her to visualize in her head, what did that look like? She could pull that back out. So that's great. So the flip that you did there, I don't know if other people saw that, but what you did is you presented the plate and you then turned it away. So it's a pretty fast one. So how do you determine how fast you're going to flip?
So that's just basically knowing your students. Like I said, I knew that she was capable of 1, 2, and 3. So I thought I'll just flip it quickly and see kind of the look on her eyes I was able to say, okay, she knows what's going on. If she hadn't, I would have shown it to her again. It's kind of about knowing the people that you're working with and knowing their capabilities and then being able to decide. And in kindergarten, they like a little bit of a game. So that's the fun factor, kind of the pull for them is to be able to like, ooh, can she trick me? Can she do it fast enough? Will I be able to get it? And that's kind of the pull for them, I feel, in kindergarten. If you can make it look like a game and make it fun, then they're more apt to be interested in it. And when they can feel successful, then that's how you pull them in. So I knew that flipping it quickly with that specific student would be fun for her. So that's why I did it like that.
Yeah. And I mean, again, she didn't disappoint. So obviously it was a good call on your part. She didn't need more time to perceive it. And I love that you said if she needed more time, you would just show it again. And I don't know about you, Andrea, but I'll just say, do you want to see it again? And then I'll be a little slower the second time because I obviously, misjudged the student that I was working with. And that's okay.
Yes, and for sure. And I always say, are you ready? And then I show it. And then if they look a bit confused because, they wear their heart on their sleeve, you can tell immediately if they're a bit confused. You just say, okay, I'll show you again. And you give them a little bit longer to look at it. And then once they've got it and they've mastered it, you can always tell that they're ready for like the game part of it.
To be faster. And I love that you brought up too that you prompt them in advance with are you ready, which is one of the things that we did talk about in the January session, which is to have those routines that draw their attention to the game that's going to be in front of them, because even some of our older students, you might have to say, okay, over here, eyes over here, everyone, but certainly in JK I would think. Okay, thanks very much, Andrea, for your insights into that interview. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
Well, I did recognize afterwards that I should have asked her, what do you see, instead of how many dots, but I also knew that child knows her number and has quite a good grasp on her number sense. So I understand that that's not the typical question that you would ask when you're doing, a number talk or a dot plate activity. So I do understand that you would say, what do you see and how do you see it? And as we moved along with the other kids in the other activities, they were able to transfer their knowledge, because they would try to explain to me when I said, how do you see it? They would try to explain to me how they saw it, but they were having difficulty. it's a kind of an abstract thought, right, to put it up in the air. So I gave them a whiteboard and a marker, and I had them draw on the page, or like on the whiteboard, exactly what they saw, and then they were able to describe it further, and then we were able to kind of dive deeper into what it looked like or how the dots were arranged, because they had their perception, and then they were able to transfer it onto the whiteboard.
Yeah. So, you know, a good part of math is about visualizing and maybe making a representation of what it is that you're visualizing. So that type of activity would support them in that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we have another interview that Andrea provided for us, and you can see the plate in the corner this time is a different plate. So we have a different orientation. And so what we're going to see, well, actually, I'll just play the video and then we can talk about it. But maybe as an educator, you want to think for a minute about how this might change what we're going to see with this student. What do you anticipate that we're going to see with this student?
Black ones and 2 red ones.
2 black ones and 2 red ones. How many all together?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Good.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All right. And so I wonder if that's what you were thinking you might see is what we saw there. So I've asked Blair to give us some insight, because Blair is an educator in that classroom as well. Why was the stop plate chosen for this child? Oops, we have to unmute Blair. That's okay.
New to this, sorry.
No worries.
So we chose that plate for that little girl for a couple of different reasons. She's a year 1, so she's a JK as well. I know we told you guys, but we have 22 JKs, so majority of them are year 1s. But she just turned 4 Halloween weekend. So, and she enjoys being with our older year 1s also, like the other student that Andrea did the previous plate with. Like, she likes to kind of go above where she is, we kind of feel. So we thought, like, let's try and see, like, if we can challenge her a little bit. And she's another one who, like the other student, like, she is a pleaser. She likes to go above and beyond to try and, you know, make us like proud, which we obviously are no matter what, but you could see it in her face. Like, she was happy that Andrea was happy with her. And she still has that toddler sort of like voice to her. You can hear it, like, you know, she has the speech still like a toddler almost. So she's using her fingers, and I don't even think she really knew that she was separating the colors, like the 2 red and the 2 black. Like, it's just what she saw. Like, well, what do you mean? How do I see it? I see 2 red and 2 black. Like, I see 4. It just wasn't, it didn't really faze her that they were different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was able to, when you said how many altogether, or when Andrea asked her how many altogether, she wasn't confused by that question. She could happily put that whole set together.
Yes.
I don't think that she had thought maybe 4 already, because she calculates that right on her fingers. She's like, what is that anyways? So I think
and it's great that she was still using her fingers, like, but she would point to the plate as well, like, as we continue to do more with her. But I think it's still good that she's still comfortable using her fingers, because I know sometimes, especially as they get older, we just want them to, you know, be able to see it. Like, that's the goal that we want them to be at, right? Like, to not use your fingers. But especially in year 1, I think it's great that she even just knew to do that on her own. Like, we didn't say you can use your fingers. She just knew it was a resource for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. And they will do that on their own without being directed by us. And so we see her using, you know, she can see the 2 subsets on that plate, the 2 red and the 2 black. And think you've kind of already answered the second question, but I'm going to bring it up here anyway. Was there anything that you observed or learned about this child's mathematics through this this particular dot plate?
Yeah, kind of just what I had previously said. You know, we wanted to sort of challenge her a little bit because she is a bit higher than where we would probably assume that she would be. And she is one that likes a challenge. Like, she is, whether it's math, whether it's writing or literacy, or like, she wants to come and do what we're doing. So she's happy to, there are other videos of her doing bigger numbers, and she's just as happy to have that challenge. So it was nice to see that she like could handle it, for lack of a better word. Like, there was no emotional breakdown. Like, you know, she didn't get quiet. Like, because we see that a lot with some of our younger students. They kind of tense up and they don't want to do it because they think we're going to get upset if they get it wrong, or they, you know, they don't feel good about themselves because they can't do it on their own. But like with that particular student, I was just happy to see that she was happy to do math. Like, that's where we want all of our kids to be, and not know that they're doing math, but once they do know they're doing math, like, it's not a big deal. It's happy. It can be fun, just like anything else.
Yeah, so you're kind of tapping into that resilience piece a little bit around math. Like, you know, she might not have been able to say 4 right off the bat, but she was certainly able to pull out the 2 and 2 and then calculate the 4. So math is something that you can figure out on your own, you know, and pull on what you do know to help you figure out what you don't know. So it's lovely. Okay, thanks a lot. Blair, is there something else you wanted to add, or?
Nope.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. I have one last video of a talk around the dots. We're just going to focus in on one child's response here. But this is a little bit of a different activity because the teacher is holding up the dot plate and not doing it as a quick image. So it's a slightly different dot activity where that is, I would say, if you're doing it as a whole class, it's more open in that all the students will probably have a way to get in on it, and you don't have to worry as much about the timing piece of it because you are working with the whole class. So here we're gonna just watch this teacher here.
I'm gonna give everybody some thinking time. Oh, Gabby, I see your thumbs up. Gabby, how many dots do you see on my?
Just gonna pause it there. Is that loud enough? It's a bit of a quieter video. Can you hear it all right? Yeah, nodding. Okay. So a couple things we heard the teacher say there is, I'm going to give everyone some think time, which is something we did talk about in January, some wait time to give them a chance to think about what they're looking at. And also that she's using that thumbs up indicator so that they're not just yelling out the answer, which takes a fair bit of training on our part as educators. They definitely don't come on board with not just yelling out the answer that comes to their mind. And so it takes a little bit of work on that routine, but it's well worth it in the end so that everyone has a chance to kind of think. All right, we're gonna pick up the video where we left off.
3.
How do you know there's 3 dots?
Because there's 3 dots.
But how did you know there's 3?
Because there's, they are each side. 1, 2, 3.
All right, so that's one student's answer to that question. And so Diana, you're the one of the educators in that classroom, so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions as well. So during that activity, how can you tell when the students are subitizing versus counting?
Well, I really like what Andrea and Blair have said, that as educators, you have to get to know your students and get to know them where they're at. And then you can only do that and then once you've done that and create that safe space, then you can start to recognize if they're subitizing or counting, and then you can actually move them forward. So in that video, you can see a lot of the students, when the dot plate or the dot card is shown, they're counting when they're, there's the tell signs where they're like nodding their head, or they're moving their mouth, like counting them, or you see them actually pointing. So they're counting it rather than just recognizing that as the number 3 or the quantity of 3. In there, that's my teaching partner, Mrs. Foz, and she has asked several of the students and you can kind of start to tell when they start to describe how they see the dots. So she goes on to say, like, how do you know? What do you see? So we've had one student say, well, there's 1 on top, 2 more, so 1 and 2 makes 3. So when you start to kind of delve into it a little bit further and start to ask them a little bit more about what they see rather than watching them actually count, you start to see a difference in their thinking of whether they're subitizing versus whether they're just counting the dots.
Yes, because we hear this one student's explanation is, well, there's 3 because there's 3. And I think that can be hard for us as educators to kind of accept that as an answer, because we've certainly been told that we need to know, like, how do they see it? But I do think sometimes with subitizing, it can be tricky because the only way they know how to tell you that they know it is by counting, which isn't actually how they knew it in the beginning. But right. It's the way that they can prove it that it is 3. It's sort of like this weird kind of cyclical question that we do. Oops, sorry. I was doing so well. See, now I'm doing this so that Blair doesn't feel bad. All right, what did you learn about your students' mathematics? And we didn't see much there. There were a lot of other answers that we didn't look at, but when you do those whole class things, or just that specific student, what did you learn about their mathematics?
Well, I think there's pros and cons for doing like a whole group activity like that. Some of the pros are being able to ask questions, when you ask more questions like, how do you see it? And the probing questions, and then they start to learn from each other rather than us sort of like, rather than they're just sitting there, expecting, they're trying to figure out what we expect them to say. So it kind of takes the onus off. So you can kind of you ask maybe a stronger student and that can subitize, or is going to give you kind of a different answer, and then you might ask somebody that you're surprised is giving you the thumbs up that they know the answer to. So that way it takes kind of the onus off, that they don't feel so shy as to, and that's when you start saying me too, then they feel awesome that they are being part of something. The con of that is that they start to repeat each other's answers, where it's like, oh, I know that because my brain told me so. And then this next one is like, oh yeah, my brain told me that too. Oh, my brain, right? So then you get these repeat, as opposed to really getting sort of that authentic piece of learning, where you would get more on a one-on-one basis that Andrea and Blair were able to show.
Yeah, so those individual ones do give you, I mean, for sure that student knows that image or not, when you do them individually. But I do think those group ones, you do get a sense of how fast they put their thumb up. They're probably subitizing, and how confident they are. And when they say something, the tricky part about subitizing is when they say, I knew it in my brain. Yeah, that is subitizing. You do just know it in your brain. So it is a little bit of a harder one that way, I find, than any of the other activities that we do, where we can kind of dig into how do you know a little differently. Subitizing is trickier that way.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Diana.
Thank you.
All right, so I know we're at the end of our time, really. We're just going to push over just a little tiny bit to give you the full the full benefit of the work that we did. If you are pressed for time and you have to leave, you know, you can find the recording, but hopefully you'll be able to stick with us. So the third question that we find educators ask us about Subitizing is, do my students need to be able to count correctly first before they can Subitize? And this one is a tricky one, I think, for us as adults to wrap our head around. I would have said, you know, when I first learned about Subitizing, probably about 12 years ago, I would have said, yes, obviously they need to count first and then they can Subitize. But the reality is, the answer to this question is no. They can learn these patterns and what they mean without being able to count, because 3 means 3. It's like a definition. It's the definition of the word 3 is that number of objects, as is 2, as is 1, as is 4. And by Subitizing like this, I mean the perceptual Subitizing, which kind of maxes out at about 4 objects. 4 objects is kind of the max that we really do with perceptual Subitizing, so tells us the psych researchers who do this kind of thing. I'm just going to share with you a little video of, I'm not sure how this is going to work here, but we're going to give it a try. Denise, can you see that screen there now, the new one? Okay, good. I wasn't sure how it would work. But this is a little video of KL. She's 2. She does not know how to count. And this is us looking at a book. And there's 6 items on this page, which she's not able to Subitize, but we'll see what she can do. So I'm just going to fast forward past the text part. How many stars are there on that page?
3.
3 there?
2 here. 3 here. 2 here. And 1 here. 3 here. And 2 here. And 1 here. 3 here. 1 here. And 2 here.
Mm-hmm. So you can see there that I have to replay. You can see there that she can Subitize 1, 2, and 3. That's what she's doing on that page, but she's not doing any counting. She just can really recognize what those sets are. Even though there are 6 items, that doesn't throw her. She can find the 2, the 1, and the 3 as she's kind of defining them. And so they actually don't need to be able to count those small sets to be able to do those small sets, those perceptual Subitizing bits. They can do that first. And interestingly enough, with that was my daughter, when we did finally get to counting, her Subitizing capability supported her to be able to count correctly. And we're going to talk more about counting next week if you join us. So she was able to count correctly because of her Subitizing. She knew how many were there already, so it supported her to be able to count. So I encourage people to do Subitizing activities even if they don't yet count correctly. One is not dependent on the other. Okay, question number 4, how do I differentiate Subitizing from counting? Well, I think Diana already took us through this. You know, we really can see the distinction between Subitizing and counting when we look at speed, how quickly they're able to give us the answer, and also the identifiers of counting. So I did pull in another video from Diana's classroom here just for us to take a look at.
If stripes cannot count them, none of us can.
5.
So that piece right there, definitely Subitizing. She looks at that dice face and she knows it's 5. She doesn't have to count.
How do you know that's 5? Because 1, 2, 3, 4,
She's
5.
proving it there with counting, but she didn't have to count to know it in the first place.
Numbers?
You see numbers? We need smallest and tallest and smartest.
Can you show me where 5 is on here?
We still need another. We'll have to get
5 on your dice, okay.
Oops, we
All right, cover it up. Anywhere else? Good. Okay. Oh, you need
So here they're playing a little game that takes that number 5, which she obviously knows really well. And she's pairing it with her number symbols. We'll talk about that in a second.
any other 5s?
finally got him.
Around the edge of the board, maybe?
Together, they brought him. After high fives and hugs, they waved to McNally.
So my guess is that she is subitizing these little sets on her way up because she's trying to scan to see if it's 5.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Try that again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, so I'm going to pause there. We're going to move on, but you know, there we see some counting. Obviously, we see the pieces of counting. We're going to take a look at those more closely next week. She wasn't able to just look at this and know that it's 5 yet. So she knows it's 5 on the dice in that particular pattern, but she doesn't know it yet in this representation. So still working on that.
So
So
Heather,
Kim, yeah.
Oh yeah, oh, that's what I was gonna say. Did you see that question in the chat? That might be a good time.
Yeah, why don't you read it out? Because I don't actually have it open.
Sure, so Kim was just saying, so if they say 5, do we have to ask how they know? So we're like, they're forcing them to prove it, which is, as you talked about, kind of lends to counting. So is this kind of counteractive?
Yeah, I would say that you don't always have to ask them how they know. If you can tell they're subitizing, then I wouldn't necessarily ask them how they know. If you've presented them with a plate like the one we saw in the second video with the 2 red and 2 black, I might ask them how they know, because that they might be doing conceptual subitizing, and I'd like to know if they're thinking 2 + 2 is 4, or if they just know that it's 4. So I might ask them there, or if in where they might be using something else. For example, I don't know if there's one on the screen right now. Oh, maybe if I was showing like this image where they might be doing, well, they know it's 10 and they're doing 1 less, even if they're fast. But again, this is, you know, greater than 4 objects in this set, so they probably are doing something conceptual there. Yeah, 5 and under objects, I probably, if they're pretty speedy, I might not ask how they know. I'm probably just going to say, yep, you're subitizing. It is a great question. Yeah. Unless the image is specifically set up to be able to talk about what's inside and remember. All right, now last, it's not really last, but question number 5. Question number 5, where does the number symbol recognition come in? So we saw in the last video that the student was pairing the number 5 on the die and what she knows about the number 5 with the symbol for number 5. And it seems perfectly appropriate in that student's case because she's so comfortable with that number 5. But where does the number symbol recognition come in? I think of number symbol recognition a lot like I think about the learning to read versus learning to talk. So, and learning math is like learning to speak and our oral language. And learning to write math is like learning to write words. With language, we probably already know that we would teach someone to speak orally before we would try to get them to write down words, because they have to have some kind of understanding of what that means, what those words mean, not just, you know, putting down symbols that don't actually have any meaning to them. And so it's the same with number symbols. So students can learn, children can learn the number and what a number means. And then by subitizing activities and working with objects, and we put a name to those. We call this number of objects 3, like we saw with little Kale when we were looking at that book. And the number of objects called 2 and the number of objects called 1 is all very solid. She doesn't need the number symbols yet because we don't actually need to write them down. But then once we do go to write things down, that's when we need the number symbols. We can introduce the number symbols later once they already have a sense of what those what that actually means. I don't know if there's questions about that. We're almost done. I did throw in a bonus question because this one is really important, I think, and it's not one we get asked a lot yet, but there's a lot of the mention of the word decomposition of number in the new curriculum. So I think we will get asked this one a lot more. So how do we support learning number decomposition with subitizing? And we've done it a little bit already. You saw it with that dot plate with the 2 red and the 2 black, for example. And in some of the dot plates that I showed you at the beginning where there's 2 different colors, that can also help, or the 2 dice, that can help with number decomposition. But I asked Alicia to go into a classroom and work also with the 5 frame as a way to help support number decomposition. And so this is a little video that she submitted. And maybe Alicia, can you tell me a little bit about your box there?
So I had the chance to work with this little group of FDKs. And the story kind of behind this garden box was that, you know, in my role and as a teacher, I get to kind of journey from classroom to classroom. And sometimes when I'm driving to different schools, I get lonely. So I want to bring some little rock friends with me, and to keep them safe throughout my drive, I have this little garden box that they feel safe, and they each have their own little room. So that was kind of the context that we started with, and the kids were really excited because they were excited to meet my friends, and they felt happy that I had someone to keep me company on my long drives to schools. So that was kind of where we started with it.
Okay, thank you. And so I'm just going to show this little snippet where you're just allowing them to explore the box and what they notice about it. I think that's what you've done here.
I like to keep them safe, so I only want some of them in here. I don't want them all. So how many friends do you think that I could bring in here?
5.
5. Why do you say that, Lauren?
Because 10 plus 10.
So she seems to know it's 5, but she gets a little confused on how she knows that. It seemed like there, Alicia.
Yeah, right away, she knew that there were actually 10 spaces, and I couldn't trick them because I had part of it covered. Obviously, I wanted to make sure that they were working with 5. So she did correct herself, but right off the hop, like, she wanted to tell me all about 10.
Yeah. She recognized that 10 frame that's hiding there.
I like to keep them safe, so I only want some.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at just a couple of little videos of this garden box and how it worked. Oh.
Ready? Okay, Everly. Ready?
Yeah. Alright.
How did you get through? How did you know?
Because 1 was in this corner and 2 were right here. That makes 3. Because there's 2 spots left.
So right away we see there her doing a lot of number work. There's 1 and 2, so that's 3, and there's 2 spots left, which maybe underpinning that is that 5 with 2 spots left would be 3. So there's a lot of part whole going on there in terms of decomposing 5.
And I think too, that goes back to that piece that I struggled. Do I ask her like how she knows? Because she said right away that it was 3. And then when I asked her, she said, you know, there's one over here and two over here. So we were almost forcing into that whole idea of conceptual subitizing. So that's a big learning curve as well, to know your students. And these ones I don't know that well. So I might have done that differently in my classroom, depending on the student, like the other educators have said before.
Yeah, one of the questions I might ask there is, how do you see the three? You know, and if you were doing it with the whole group, then you could ask if there were ways that other people saw the three that was different from that student, for example. So if you were working with multiples, but you know, you acknowledge the fact that she just knew there were three, or you could ask, you know, do you notice about anything about how the three friends are sitting or whatever, just to help draw their, because the way the spacing that you use there definitely leans itself towards the decomposing 3 to 1 and 2. If you'd put the three all side by side, then there might not be as much discussion about the threes as what's inside of 3 as much as what's inside of the 5. But you want to be able to do all of the different versions, which is what somebody asked earlier, not just the one type of 3. Oops, did I get it? Yeah.
Are you ready? How many friends are with you? What made you think 6?
Because there was one more.
Show me what you saw. How did you know there was 6? You didn't even have to count them.
So you can sit on this one.
What did you know?
And you can see her using her little fingers there to help her. As she's talking, she doesn't need them, but she's using them as support. So there we see you working. The last one you were working with what's inside of 5. So there could be lots of conversations around the 3 and the 2. With this setup, we're now pushing past the 5 and looking at 5 with some extra ones. How many?
Yeah, this student was the only one I went past that 5 kind of benchmark, because she showed a lot of flexibility in all of the activities and all of the conversations. For the other ones, I would not have gone there quite yet with them.
Yeah, and I would think in certainly in year 1, it would be probably tricky to do that. We really want them to attach to the 5. We want them to be thinking, just like this student is, 5 plus 1 more, that's 6. And so that's where the 5 frame is so helpful. And we can really attach to that. So thank you for that work that you did, Alicia, in the classroom with those students. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is one that you invented for them just that day, with so they could play their own kind of game here with that 5 frame. And are they hiding some rocks underneath those cups?
Yeah, so this was actually today, because yesterday we talked about the whole garden box, and I had lots of kids that were really interested in it. And so today we just kind of moved it to a tabletop activity. So again, working within that 5, and we just had little rocks. So I said, so how many friends, you know, are you bringing in? How many are still under the cup? And they thought it was so much fun. So it was kind of an impromptu, not polished, which is sometimes the best activities that we get.
Yeah, I was thinking so that it was an extension of the garden box activity that you did, so that they could play it kind of on their own. So
okay.
That's, yeah.
Yeah, Heather, thank you so much. There was so much information, and I know it's kind of a tight frame here. We try to cram lots in. So if you are curious to learn a little bit more, there's many ways. Ask a colleague. You have lots of experts within your school. Every school also has a coach, so please do not hesitate to reach out to us. The blog has all sorts of great information, and also those archived sessions from January, and these recordings will also be put there. And then find a copy of what to look for, and that kind of continuum or extension, kind of that add-on for our continuum that we worked with.
For sure. And So we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We'd like to thank Diana, Andrea, and Blair for their work today, or for the session. It was very, very, very enlightening. And Heather, as always a pleasure to have you on board with us today and share your insights and wisdom with us. Like I said, there was many learning moments I had in just planning with these ladies for this session here, so I appreciate it very much. And just to pump our own tires here, there are some more sessions coming up. So if this is something you're interested more in, the one on counting is coming next week. And I would look forward to seeing everyone.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy your
Thank you,
evening.
Blair and
Thanks,
Diana and
Heather.
Andrea.
Yes.
See you guys
Thank you,
next week.
guys.
Thank you.